But when looking for the conquest in the expected time period, archaeologists have found no evidence. In fact, many of these sites were not even occupied throughout the entire Late Bronze Age. No high walls, no massive destructions, only a series of burnt-out and empty ruins. This has been a key factor in the current skepticism over the biblical account of the conquest.
Again, maybe they've been looking in the wrong time for evidence of the Israelites entering Canaan. Because when you look earlier in the Middle Bronze Age, all these cities were occupied, and they were guarded by high walls. And amazingly, they all suffered major destructions in the same short period, just as described in the Bible.
When you put those cities side by side, the biblical account and the archaeology match extremely well. I think we have enough destroyed and abandoned cities to say this fits the sequence of events the Bible is describing. There's a high probability that we're looking here at Joshua's conquest.
The whole thing, from the beginning of the sojourn in Egypt, the slavery, Moses and the Exodus, the conquest of the Promised Land, is all there in one nice, neat line, but it's way too early.
Roel Bimson and others suggest that this problem didn't start with the Bible. It began with Egypt. They propose that early scholars developed its dating incorrectly, and that new information requires that the events of Egypt's history be shifted forward on the timeline by centuries.
And all of a sudden, these things that are too early become contemporary with the events in the Old Testament. They sync up again. Everything links together.
I was so excited to hear of this possibility. It would explain why all the evidence has been consistently earlier. But could the history scholars created for Egypt really be off by centuries?
I'm very much against chronological revisionism. Very good, very competent historians have been working for decades and decades on Egyptian chronology and Near Eastern chronology. There's still more work to be done, but I don't see a possibility of moving things centuries.
I'm not into this business at all, and I think that we know enough to say that we may be wrong 10 years here and 10 years there, but there's no way, to change, to shift centuries. I mean, forget it. I think that we are on solid ground, so there's no need to look for, different centuries.
What was I supposed to do now? Hoffmeier and Finkelstein represent mainstream opinion, and I can't simply ignore it. The fact is, the majority of scholars, even believers in the Bible, won't allow the evidence I've seen to be connected to the Exodus. It's just too early. This is the biggest giant of all, standing in the way of solving this problem. But the biblical pattern was so strong that I just couldn't let it go.
Mahoney's researchers uncovered a lead that led him to Oxford University. On St. John Street is the Griffith Institute, one of the greatest storehouses of Egyptological documents in the world. He was here to review the writings of the late Sir Alan Gardner, perhaps the greatest specialist in reading hieroglyphs in the 20th century, and he had a great hand in uncovering what we know today.
I was moved as I looked through his personal notes. In some ways, I was following a path that he had helped to clear. After a lifetime of searching, Gardner wrote something that directly impacted the question I was dealing with.
It must never be forgotten that we are dealing with a civilization thousands of years old, and one of which only tiny remnants have survived. What is proudly advertised as Egyptian history is merely a collection of rags and tatters.
If all we have are rags and tatters, how sure can we be about the dates? Alan Gardner said that what we have is rags and tatters. Is that still true today, or do you think that's changed?
No, I think that basically is true. What's interesting about the source material from ancient Egypt, though, is that those rags and tatters are more numerous and of a more varied kind than almost any other civilization on the face of the earth. You name it, every kind of material imaginable has come down to us. Not complete, but tantalizing rags and tatters. And it's a wonderful thing to have all of this material, but it's also extremely frustrating because it means there's that much more room for argument and doubt.
Kent Weeks made no indication that he'd be in favor of anything as major as shifting Egypt's history by centuries. But the reality is, a shift wouldn't just affect Egypt, because the archaeological dates for Canaan and the surrounding region are all dependent on Egypt's history.
When all is said and done, it's the Egyptian chronology that underpins everything else that's being done throughout the rest of the known world. It's a big responsibility, and it's one of the reasons that people look at it so closely, because in terms of reconstructing ancient history, a lot hinges on the answers.
So if Egypt's historical dates are not that certain and need adjusting, then Canaan's history would also require the same kind of shift, because they're connected.
But a lot of people don't want to do that.
No, because Egyptian chronology has been assumed to be fixed now for a very long period of time. So the whole idea of taking it apart and starting again is anathema to most Egyptologists.
Because it would undo a lot of their books, wouldn't it?
Well, it certainly would, yes.
But there's mounting evidence that the current reconstruction of Egyptian history has major problems that have nothing to do with the Bible.
There's a whole host of reasons for being skeptical about the current Egyptian chronology. Some of them to do with Egypt itself, but a lot of them from outside Egypt, which a number of people are beginning to look at.
Other good scholars maintain that you don't need to change Egypt's timeline in order to see evidence for the Exodus. James Hoffmeyer believes textual clues in the Bible point to the Exodus happening at the 1250 BC Ramesses Day. Bryant Wood and Charles Ayling believe the Exodus occurred around 1450 BC, using the conventional dates for Egypt and Canaan. They believe a case can be made for Israelites living in Egypt prior to that time, and later Israel appearing as a nation in Canaan. So an Exodus of some kind must have taken place.
But the only place that I saw a pattern matching all the steps was in the Middle Kingdom, not the New Kingdom. And if that's not a coincidence, it would require some kind of major change. Either the Exodus happened long before 1450, or the dates for Egypt's timeline are off.
The debate over the dates of ancient history is intensifying, while the conclusions of those who support major adjustments differ in their details. They're all of the same mind that these things are worth investigating, and that chronology is not yet fixed and is not yet final. Researchers like Roland Bimson believe the main problem lies in these lesser-known dark periods of Egypt's past. They think scholars have miscalculated their lengths, causing distortions in the dates for everything before them. The biggest suspect is this very long third dark period, which new information suggests has been overinflated by centuries. If it were reduced, the history of Egypt would need to move forward in time.
For many years, I was intimidated by the giant of Egypt's dating. But what made me take a second look was when I learned that it's been necessary to insert gaps into the histories of all the surrounding civilizations in order to match the dating of Egypt's third dark period. Yet the archaeology of these cultures does not seem to support such gaps. Something was wrong.
What might history look like if the dark periods were adjusted the way that some scholars believe the evidence demands?
What's not changing is the Bible timeline, because that's not affected by it. If you're changing the Egyptian timeline, you're moving it against the Bible timeline. So all of a sudden, things that were not in the right time period between the two are suddenly lining up in a different way. And that's the exciting bit, because that's when we suddenly start to find evidence for the biblical story.
It's startling to think how significant this could be, because chronology, the dates assigned to these events, is the thing being used to convince the world that the Bible is just a fairy tale. But look at the pattern. Evidence matching Joseph and the early Israelites' arrival in Egypt, their tremendous multiplication, their descent into slavery, the judgment and collapse of Egypt, the deliverance and exodus of the Semitic population, and finally in Canaan, evidence matching the conquest of the Promised Land. I know there's a lot of disagreement over the dating, but what strikes me is that if you put all the dates to the side for a moment, what emerges from the archaeology is this pattern that matches the Bible every step of the way. And doesn't that deserve to be taken seriously? But for now, those who hold to established conventions will not allow these connections to be made. I'm not an Egyptologist, I'm a filmmaker. And I'm not endorsing any one dating theory out there. I'm just searching for the truth. Because isn't that what the pursuit of both science and faith should be? A search for truth.
At the end, the audience, the people themselves, they will judge. They will know if you are a scientific man, a logical theory, or you are exaggerating, or you have some story from your own mind.
Are these findings just an exaggeration? Or is looking for the Exodus at the earlier date the key step in bringing the Bible out of the shadows of myth and into the light of true history? People wonder why they haven't heard about this before. But what I found out was that a lot of people don't want to talk about it. Archaeologists, people in the media, no one's willing to actually tell this story. And I had to ask that same question to myself. Was I willing to follow this story to where it really led? But there is something to these ancient stories, and we just felt that, you know what, we just had to let people know what the truth was.
After the Israelites left Egypt, it is written they miraculously crossed a mighty sea and traveled on to Mount Sinai. No trace of their journey has ever been found. But if there really was an Exodus, then the mountain was somewhere out there.